Okay, so how to get curves done, and as you can see here, pearls on a chain, and how can we basically create an an IMM brush with curves that follows a specific line, and you can actually wrap this curved brush then around a head or a surface like this one. So let's get started. The first thing you obviously need are those pearls. And the first thing I also made or understood wrong was in the process of making these pearls as an IMM brush. This is very, very important. So I really start from scratch, and I show you this here. Let me save, first of all, this tool that I don't lose it. And once this is done, we can really start explaining everything and documenting step by step how you can something like this, how you can achieve that. So the first thing is I go into C plugins, and then under FBX import I bring in basically my Stone X, and I call it just Stone X. Okay. Now when I brought this in, you see that I only had to create the pearl, which is here in the center, and then I created on top of it a part of it. And I also used here 3ds Max, as you can see, and that's very simple and very straightforward. I also wanted to say it was a mistake. What I did before at the beginning was basically duplicating this object, and I thought like, okay, it would be okay to have one on the top and one off the bottom, but this is not correct. It will not be possible to weld them and to get these dots kind of like aligning or put together. So let's go back here. Now, as you can see, I tried to keep also the faces very low. And the reason why is because we are going to project it, but also when you use a ton of vertices and polygons, if you would use that on a curved brush, you get such a dense mesh, like with millions of polygons, because you put thousands of these pearls or whatever on your head in this case, and then it would drag down your machine at one point. So, and it's also not necessary. This is point number one. Point number two, as you can also see, I was deleting all the unnecessary faces on the back and on the top because we don't need those. Point number three, as you also can see, I keep the geometry really low poly, okay? And also here, I don't use any smoothing groups, because also what is very important in smoothing normals, if you would have smoothing normals on and smoothing groups, and you use this later on for baking, you wouldn't see the faceted results from the edges, which I would like to achieve, because it's a stone, it's a gemstone, kind of like fake look. And in this particular case, I want to keep those hard edges and the gemstone look. So this is really the most important thing. The second maybe important thing is everything is centered at 0, 0, 0, right? This is of course important. And another important understanding is when you look here, you see on the top right the face, and that basically tells you in what direction are you projecting it. And as you can see, this would be side profile, this is front view, and we are facing basically straight to the face, what you can see here on the upper right, so front view. And another important part is when creating an IMM brush, to connect the dots, it has to go in a vertical direction. Horizontal will not work. So this is why you can see here basically that when I would push this over here, I started first also creating it horizontal this way. This would not work. You also see it here on the upper right on the face. So all those points you have to consider from the base mesh, what you create for your IMM brush, because if this is not considered, all these steps and all those points, it will not work and it will break. Okay, what is the next step? The next step is crystal clear. Once you have a geometry here, and by the way, what you see here, There's only one poly group needed. I'm not using an IMM mesh that consists of trees or 3 different separated poly groups. You can do this when you want to weld them in the middle section, middle part is going to be welded and the top and the bottom stay the same. But in this particular case, I did not need that, or I don't need that, because the pearls are basically running around, you know, the string. And so the pearls always have to stay consistent. And the only thing you really want then to basically distribute is the string they're basically attached on. Okay, so but this is one mesh. And as you can see here in my subtool, that's all what I have here. I call it X. Wow. Okay, so that's it. Now, as simple as it looks, it's kind of like crazy that you need to consider all those things. The other point I want to call out, yes, you could also go in and basically say on the low poly, you want to unwrap this. Okay, you could go in and say like, just unwrap the whole thing and then flatten it. But because we're using projection and use this as the high resolution mesh, this is not really what you would need to unwrap. But in case, let's say you also want to texture it later on and want to use the high resolution mesh, of course, also let's say in Unreal, because you use nanite and it doesn't matter how many million polygons you have, then yes, it would be also great if you unwrap this whole thing. And as you can see here, this was not corrected in Max, because what I wanted to do is I didn't take the time yet. But also, I think really important to mention is that if you unwrap it, then I would basically give the string a super small space here, and you know, just really make this small, because the string itself you don't really see anything. But let's say if this is a pearl and you still want to see some, you know, roughness or specular highlights and dirt maps on it or something like this, I would basically do it this way, right? So now it would be unwrapped correctly, and then again you can save this, and then also I exported just this one here as a stone and said export selected and say like stone X. Okay, so and once this is exported, you can bring it in into Zbrush, and here I have now the UV unwrap, but I also can unwrap this thing here really quickly automatically and say unwrap it again, flatten it, and see how it looks. And they actually did a very, very similar job, you see. So, okay, so I go now to unflatten, and I can also save that tool and say like save as and call it stone string 001. So that's it. Now that means that is just all about prepping a base geometry, and you have to work really, really accurate, but it pays off later. And as you can see, we only have active points, 31 active points. Okay, so if I go here and check this also in 3ds Max, we have here 31 active points, also called vertices, and 18 polys. Okay, that's it. So that's the whole thing here. All right, now let's get into this process of basically creating an IMM brush. How do you do this? You go to brush, and then under brush is create, and under create you see it here, it's called create insert mesh. Now you push the button and it will tell you, hey, create a new one or append it to an existing one. I just create a new one, and when you do it, it tells you here on the upper left, hey, you created a new insert mesh, and this is just called insert mesh because I haven't been loading any other insert meshes. Now what you also can do is you want to save this brush for later on, right? And you can click brush and save, and then it's saving. You can see it here, a CBP file, and I can call this here under IMM stone 001, and that is a possibility. But what I usually like doing is to save this brush. I go into Brush and Save As, and then I go into my Zbrush Maxon folder, and then you find here Zbrushes. And under Zbrushes, there's the Insert-IMM folder, and I save it in here. And I call this IMM Stone 001. Okay, and I override it and say yes. Here we go. So that means now we created successfully an IMM brush, but we are by far not even closely done with our exploration and how we can use this brush. So what I'm doing next is basically I'm loading here my head, okay, which I started. This is my tool before, and as you can see, we have here already these nice pearls on the string. And I just hide this layer for now, and then you can see here, this is our head. Now let's get started and let's explore what we can actually do if we have our head here and how we can actually use our IMM brush. Okay, so first of all, when I would pull this up here, you can see on top of it, when my IMM brush is selected, it just pulls up my geometry and it tries to attach it on that head. At the same time, you also can see that, you know, the head itself gets masked out, and you could now drag and drop other IMM brushes on it, and then it will always mask you out the last one. And the reason why this is pretty cool is because here you can then say under subtools, you have it here, split, and then you can say split unmasked points or split masked points. So if I click split the unmasked points, basically my pearl on the string gets actually split off. And as you can see here now, I would need to change my layer in my subtool. I would basically work here now completely isolated with my pearl on one string. Okay, so now because this is not how I want to use my insert mesh brush, I want to use a curve tool on it, which is nothing else than splines. Okay, so the curve operation feature is very important. I delete this here now, and basically I go back to my head, and by the way, Shift F, you can see, of course, the polygroups. So as you can see, I have polygroups. I have basically two polygroups, one the purple one on the bottom and the greenish one here. And I want to show you now how we use the curve feature on the brush. So the brush is still selected. Now the next thing what we need to do is we need to activate the splines, or in this particular case called curve function, and that is basically under the stroke menu. So the stroke menu is in the center here, and you can actually drag the stroke menu out, or just by clicking on this little dot icon here, it jumps over and jumps to the top on the right bar and stays there. Okay, so this is for the user interface probably also good to know. As you can see, you can collapse it here, and then you see always, if you collapse everything, below is your tool, but above the tool is now the stroke menu. And in the stroke menu, we can find now the curve operations. And you can see here we have curve functions, and curve modifiers. First of all, we want to activate the curve mode. So we click on curve, click curve mode, and now what you see is here we have a curve step 1. That means whenever you draw on the head and you get a curve now, it creates another step after one step was done. Okay, so let's get started. So now I can draw on it, and as you can see, it's starting drawing my IMM brush perfectly, following the surface onto my mesh. As you can see, it looks really good, and this is exactly how you want to have it. What I also want to show is you can definitely see this here. First of all, you can undo this, right? And I can go back and then I draw a little bit smaller curve, so not as long. And I think what's interesting also to document is you can see with clicking S, I can also change my size of my brush, but also when you zoom in, this is very, very little here, you can also see this little blue center circle, okay? And that basically means when this pops up blue, then you're ready to extend your brush. Do you see that? You can basically click in it, and then you can see like, okay, I want to make sure that, you know, that I'm not dragging, but I want to draw, keep drawing on this pattern here and, you know, keep extending my curve. So you can do this also here at the beginning. So as long as this is basically blue and you don't actually hit the center curve, you can always continue to draw the line. So another cool feature is, of course, here's my draw size at 9.5 or whatever. If I want to make larger ones and I created here a curve, I just type in the draw size of 20, click on it and see check this out, or I say 40, and it's automatically adjusting now the size. So this is really cool, right? Now, you can already see when we make this larger that we have an issue. And there was also an issue I couldn't resolve at the very beginning, because you can see that those chains are breaking. And the reason why is because they are not welded. Now, when you go into the brush, in the brush features or options, you find here basically more settings. And one of these settings you can find is under Modifiers. And when you click on Brush Modifiers, you can then see here there is TriParts, which is enabled by default at the very beginning, and welding points. Now, with the TriParts, it's basically you would need to set up 3 different polygroups for the IMM mesh so that the software knows, okay, when you start drawing the middle center, the middle part, the middle polygroup will be welded, and the top and the bottom, they always stay consistent. But since we didn't set this up with a polygroup of 3 different, you know, the IMM mesh is not a mesh that contains 3 polygroups, we don't need that. This is the first thing. So you turn actually the TriParts off. And then the second thing is you want to turn on weld points, because this is trying now to weld the points then after the stroke was done. And we can check this out here and see if this is working. Most likely it's not working because it's also like demoing it. Let's see if we keep this on the TriParts. I don't think that it's actually doing it, but it could be. It's looking better, but I'm not 100% sure if it's welding it or if it's basically also the space distance that I probably didn't consider at the very beginning when I modeled the mesh. And this is also what I wanted to point out. So for example, when we have here this mesh, it should be, honestly, I think this is what I was missing. It should fit within mesh that is 10 by 10 or 1 by 1 at the end. You know, you actually decide the real size. And when I check this out here, I think this is also what I, you know, missed, because when you look at this, this would be now at 0, 0, 0, 0. Then you can see that my mesh is missing a portion to continue for each step, because 1 centimeter would be always 1 step. And this is what is not the case, as you can see, because we have here now a little gap. And this little gap, I think it's great for the presentation. You can see now here missing. right? Because when we zoom in, we see like clearly, oh no, we missed this little tiny little thing here. If we have a curve step of 1. But luckily, if you messed it up like I did, right? Of course you could go in here and then you could make those adjustments and pull this up until you have really the plane completely hitting this line here. And then you could re-import this FBX, and then because these points are hopefully 100% aligned, will match. Okay, so you need to work. I learned this here the hard way. You need to work really, really precise. That is something that will pay off also later for baking, but it also pays off when you use then the IMM brushes inside of Zbrush. And that was actually something I underestimated to not work as precise, but as you can see, this would be really perfect and accurate, and then you could export this one again. Don't forget to delete then your plane. And in this case, it's just a scale thing. Like you can create it. I just created inside of 3ds Max in centimeters, like 10 by 10 centimeters, so I can see it a little bit better. But it literally can be 1 by 1. And then it's just a scale factor as long as you stay within the 1 by 1. So, and then I could export this again, export selected as my Stone X. So doesn't really matter, but I think also good to mention. I think very important to mention. Now, if we go back to Zbrush, and let's say you have been creating, like me, a mesh that you accidentally, didn't set up correctly within a box where you have now steps falling 1 by 1. Luckily, Zbrush is helping you in the stroke menu where you can correct it. And as you can see here, when you pull up the stroke menu, you find under the curve features, curve step. And this would be now a full step. But if we put this down to 0.9, and now we go back, where I just draw another one and show it right next to it. And let's make this also larger. I don't know what I had here, maybe 40. So we can clearly see it. Now you can see that these steps are not completely fulfilled. It shrinks it down, of course. It's not a full step. And because it's not a full step, you can close that gap in between. So that's kind of like the trick, okay? And we could change this to 0.95. Maybe it's just 5% that I'm missing. And then I can go in and draw it again. But then you can see, depending on the size, also here, it's not working anymore at 0.95 and maybe it's 0.92. And this seems to be working. It's on the edge. So if you really want to make sure if you have a strong curve in it, it seems like I hit it before. To make sure you have no issues, then it's 0.9 and then you should be on the safe side. But you can already see how sensitive it is. It really matters that you work accurate when you create those IMM curve brushes, because you will see it is paying off later. And if you don't work accurate, it can be very frustrating, and yeah, it can be a real challenge. So now what is the next thing I wanted to show you? So I think this is super, super important. And if I go back now to our head, and this is what I identified I have to do, we have been setting up our IMM curve brush, but we are still not done, because now the question is, how do we bring this with a feasible size to our head? And when I checked before, the size of those pearls, so little beads, you can also call them, whatever, it basically is around like 16 here in the draw size. And now, of course, you could say, you know what, if I want to draw here a line, I have to follow the entire headline by hand. You can also press X to basically go in here, and then the left side and the right side symmetry is on, and then you could go in and say like, okay, I continue here the line, and then I go in and make also adjustments manually. And there are also the features where you can say like bend at the beginning, bend for the end, and you can see here clearly this is the most. Now you bend the beginning and the end. But if you would go in and adjust all those, separately or manually, you also go crazy, right? If you want to have a full loop. So there's a better way to do that. And luckily, Zbrush has some, I would say some really cool and nice features that is going to help you to get this done. But how are we doing this? And I turn on Shift F and explain it here as well. There is under curve functions basically the solution, and you see here you can use polygroups, you can use open borders or creased edges. And that basically means when you have here open borders, I call it open borders. Basically everywhere where you have an open geometry, there's a border. You could click on it and say like frame the mesh, and it creates a spline or the curve for you. Do you see it? It created it automatically, right? So you can see here, this is where the curve is. If you don't like that curve, you click on delete and it's gone, and then you can click again on the border frame mesh, and you can see it created it. But it also, don't be confused, it didn't create it outside of the head, it created it inside. And as you also can see, I turned this off on purpose and I deleted those faces. The head doesn't have faces overall everywhere inside to save polygons. The head basically stops here, right? And the polygons inside, which you will never see unless the head is maybe not, you don't wear it on the head and it's just like another prop. Then you can have, of course, also the inner faces shown, but here for the low poly later, it helps definitely to save on polygons because you will never see that as long as this head is being sitting on a head, right? Like where it belongs to. But anyways, what's important to show now is that you can see it created this inner curve, and it created this spline or curve automatically by clicking frame mesh. And as you can see, when I delete it, it only works if border is on. If I click frame mesh and the border is off, you don't actually see it. So I click border on, frame mesh, and here it is. Now, what is next? We still have our IMM brush selected. We also have our curve mode on. This is important. And now if we click on this curve with our draw size 16, you see that Zbrush, if I click Shift F, was now trying, and I actually clicked it twice, so let's do it once. That's funny. Okay, so I don't know what's happening here. Let's do like draw size of, okay, so yeah, there was obviously something killed it. Okay. Yeah, so this is definitely something for Joseph Drust and his team and Paul PP. I always forget his last name. I don't know how to say it, but he's funny. He's super funny. So this is something, I'm sorry guys, this is not under my control. But there is a quick save, and it luckily saved quick save. You see the last one here, 3171. So before I died, and we are back here. I hope so. And if not, it's a good, I would say it's a good way to show you how we exercise, also how we can do this. Yeah, that, okay, so that is not, of course, the tool what I had loaded before. So I go in, I saved it, of course, and I have it under my Zbrush, Z tools, head 3. and go in and load it real quick. And then see, it was also great that we already saved, so to speak, our brush, and we saved also the tools, because if this is happening, you can always load it and go back and start, you know, from where you actually left off much quicker. So as you can see, we're back here. And now what I wanted to show you is a really cool feature that you might already see it here. If I wanna draw now a line or those pearls on a string, and I wanna align that along a loop, right? Then I'm using basically creased edges to get this done. So I show you here again. I go to stroke, click on this, so it jumps back up here. Now I have my stroke here. I can turn on curve mode. I have here my curve functions. And of course, I need to show you how to create those creased edges. But I show you here that what the other feature is doing as well. So polygroups means you can create now a curve wherever two polygroups or 3 or 4 different polygroups are meeting each other. So if I click frame mesh, you can see we have 2 polygroups. We have one on the top, which is green, and we have the purple on the bottom or in the inside. And that means we get one line, and that line also where it creates that spline line really matters, because wherever this spline line lives, exactly there you can see the creation as the center line for the string beans or pearls or whatever you want to call them, right? Or the beads. So now as you can see, when we did this, we lost now our brush, and now I can go into our brush menu, and then under the IMM brush, as I saved it before, and here we go. It's the stone 001, and if I click on it, we have our brush back. Now don't forget, when you load your brush and you didn't save it with the curve mode on, you have to activate the curve mode, right? Very, very important. And yeah, and now we have it, and now we can click it, and now you can see it creates perfectly our mesh, so to speak, or our pearls, and is following the string, as you can see, right? Now remember, we had an issue with the curve steps because this was not properly done in the first setup. And as you can see, this is always later on then a little pain in the ass, because you can, when you zoom in, you see now that these spaces are missing. And this is why I suggest always fix it. If possible, go back, fix the original geometry, because otherwise you always have to go then back here in your curve mode and change this. Don't forget to change it to 0.9 or whatever, and then also roll back and make sure once the line was created that you have it set up, and now it's closing. Do you see that? Now the gap is gone. But again, it would be much better if you fix this from the base mesh. So now check this out. I could say maybe I'm happy with this, and you know, I could say then if I like the position, if everything is okay, I could keep it this way. I can keep going on and say like, you know what, great job. And I start loading it then into Substance Painter for baking. But there is one thing in terms of working accurate and also for baking. Check this out. When you look at this, you can clearly see there is a gap, right? So that means those pearls, they don't really touch the geometry on the surface as they should. And that becomes in the baking process later on a problem, because it will look dirty, you will run into normal map issues and so on, and it will not look good. So you would have now 2 options here, which is pretty easy to get this done. Is first of all, under what we want to do is, first of all, we want to break this free that we can actually control it. You could also control it here by moving up the line and just check it. So this is also how you can do it. So, and then you can see if you moved up the spline or curve. So for me, it's kind of like a spline operation, but it's the curve. You can position now the pearls, but you also can see when you do that, right? You can see there is also a rotation issue because they are standing now a little bit in a different angle outside. And this is also creating an issue later on in baking because you don't work accurate. So, but you know, you could then try to go in and rotate, but nope, this thing will not work anymore because you work on the whole curve, and that's not the way to do it. So what is the way? How can you get this done so that it looks better and that it fits? Okay, let me show you. So I showed you in the curve mode before that we have under curve functions border and polygroups and creased edges. And so far I only showed you the border and the polygroups, right? But in both cases it just doesn't work because, you know, the border is just inside and I don't need any jams inside. Then the polygroups, they are basically on the very, very bottom, and as you have seen, it creates then the issue with the pearls because they will not fit really on the edge. So what I did is this. I'm going to use like creased edges, and when you check my model, you can clearly see that I was creating here creased edges. See that? And when you use now creased edges in an edge loop, that feature allows you to create now on every single creased edge, and you also see here one creased edge on the top, which I did, to create those curves on the creased edges. So if we select creased edges, click frame my mesh, you can see now I have here a curve and on the bottom a curve, and both curves are basically outside, and this is where I created the creased edges. Now if you would click inside of the first curve and then click also on the second, you always need to click each curve. So each curve is like its own spline, so to speak. Then you can see, also controlling our curve step is still the same, that it looks already much, much better. And the reason why is because that edge loop was the center, that creased edge is basically the center of you know, that front panel, so to speak. Now, of course, what we also can do is, by the way, if you click this little center icon here, the gizmo, the pivot point is jumping to the center. And then now you could also bring this up and bring it more to the front. Now, what you can see is also the draw size is still too large because one of those gemstones should be around like 16. And now I have to go back because positioning wasn't correct. And then here we go. I do 16. Can go back into my move tool. And you see it's slightly a little bit above, but this is so minor that you can push it up a little bit. And now it's really centered. Okay. So, and now you see, because it's centered and the angle was correct, how the spline was actually created. It fits much, much better. You can also, again, under curve functions, delete it, that you can see it a little better. And maybe there are still, from the viewport, some tiny issues with the depth. Okay, so as you can see. And it looks actually, that's the shadow from the render. It looks actually fine. And then there is another thing I wanted to show you, because sometimes you want to play with the depth. That means like, okay, if I can see that the mesh is floating on top of the surface too much, I get some little gaps here in between, and you want to change this. There's also a feature where you can change this. And I go back here and redo this process, okay, and show you. And then later on, I also show you and document how you do the creasing, because that's very, very important. But we are still in the curve brush features, in the brush features, but also in the curve operations and so on. So the depth, we can change the brush properties on the brush. And then you can clearly see we had this here before. We had modifiers like TriParts and weld points. As you can see, we don't need any welding points because that's not necessary. And then you can also find on the brush options the depth, and that is here. And that basically means, okay, where would I like to start when I click basically, you know, my curve brush on top of the surface. And what you can see here to explain this, it's basically nothing else like a front view, and the dot shows you are you online, so it's even 0, 0. It's called embed 0. And if you would push this higher up now, that means it stands out already 50 units, whatever that is, or 51 units, or 47 units, or 40 units, okay? And then when you draw basically on this mesh, it will stand out further, okay? So, and what I want to do is I want to push this in. And so what we have to do is, first of all, we have to go back. And then we go back here and frame the mesh with creased edges. Then let's do a brutal one, -60, and let's see if this is doing something or if it's failing. So it did it, and you can clearly see the value is so strong that you can't see it outside. And the gemstones are so embedded, so deeply embedded, that's the thickness of the head that you don't see them. So I can go back, so it works very well. And before I click now, I go to my brush and change this to maybe -5. Okay, so it's slightly below, and I click on it. And as you can see, it's very sensitive. So a -5 value goes already very, very deep into the mesh. So we want to change this and want to say -1. And let's check out that value. Wow. So that means -0.1. Okay, that doesn't work. 0. Yep, it only goes in full numbers. Okay. So then I would say the only option we have is -1. Let's go back here. And it could be, I'm not 100% sure, that it also considers then the smoothness, or basically it considers the creation of it when you created it. So let's go to 0 again. I have to go back. Okay, that looks like it's buggy right now. Because as you can see, now it's pushing it all the time into it. So let's go back to the very, very beginning. Let's go, we have 0. Yeah, that seems buggy. Okay, so I think I encountered another bug. That's that's really funny. Wow. Frame mesh, and then the depth, you saw it before it worked. If we do now, let's say +2 or 3 or whatever, it's still like pushing it into the mesh. So in that particular case, I have to restart because there's definitely a bug. There's definitely something going on that is not working. And what I also can do is I can try it that way, but you can see it is pushing it rooted geometry and it stays like this. Even if I change now the depth to plus 70. Oh wow, now it worked. I wonder if it's doing then always the math on top of it, but that is a little strange and it doesn't work then from the center. That could be. But see, like if I set it now back to 38, it could be a multiplier, or not a multiplier, it could be that it always calculates plus minus. So that's definitely odd. But okay, we can go all the way back until we have, we create our line and then click here and click here. And you can see now we have actually the depth, the correct depth, and we have everything set up for success. So what we can do now here is, again, what I showed you before, is slightly move it to the edge. And I bring this slightly up because this is exactly, you know, where I wanted to have it. And yeah, there's also a little issue here now. We didn't have this before. So maybe also if you have symmetry on or off, that could be it. But again, frame mesh, click in here and fingers crossed. See, now it works. And if I push this up, now we have it. But this was definitely already like a journey. You see, it's definitely not 100% working. I mean, we can now see here the mesh is broken. Do you see that? Do you see here it's broken? Oh man, and that doesn't make me happy at all. That is, yeah, frustrating, because honestly it should close here the loop. Now it's open here. And I wonder if it has something to do where you start clicking the loop. Well, now I hit it. But that's funky and funny. It might be that it makes a difference where you start clicking, on what corner angle, or closer maybe to the seam. And then Alexa is now talking in the background. Nobody needs her, but she always thinks I'm talking to her. Okay. So now we are in a good spot. Now it seems like we have it. Okay. So now I click also on the top ring here. I'm in draw mode. And maybe because both are still have been connected, maybe that what was causing the issue. And bring this still up to the edge. Now we are good. Yes. And it's funny, I mean, when you want to work really accurate, you see like how sensitive this is and how important it is to work like really clean and, you know, accurate. So this is basically now done, but I still didn't show you the crease feature and how to get those creasing things in. But before we do so, I go back into my draw mode, and then under subtool, I basically say now when this is unmasked, split, and then say split the masked points. So now you can see we have here the points, and that looks really, really good. Okay, so they look really fine now and they are spot on. Now what I also do is I save the tool. I don't want to lose it. Save it, because you never know, it could crash. Even if you have quick save, it's good if you have it. Also what you saw is, because I was now using a center line, right? You see they are basically aligned in the center and facing also in the right angle, in the tilt, okay? So that is also very, very important. Now, what I didn't show you yet is definitely the fact, like, how did I create those creased edges? Now, first of all, under the geometry, you have here the feature crease. And now I can say to this low poly base mesh, uncrease all. Okay, so now you see all the creases are gone. So we had two creases, one here and one here. Now for the creases itself, I use the C modeler brush. So I go under brush, like hit B, and then Z for C modeler, check C modeler. And if you haven't been using C modeler brush before, oh my god, that brush has so many features, it's crazy. So you need hours and almost, I would say, weeks and months for training just for the C modeler. But this is how you activate it, and then you can access all the operations by clicking the space bar, and you click the operations, the edge operations, when an edge is highlighted. So edge is highlighted, you click space bar, and you get all the edge features. So this is just for the edges, like crease, collapse, or whatever. And if you basically select a poly surface and click on it, now you get all the features and options for the poly surface and operations. And of course, you can do the same with the dot or vertex point. So if you click on that, now you get all the features and options for the points. Pooh. And as you can see, the operations are, it's nuts. This is just all hidden in one brush. So you can take a lot of time just learning the C modeler brush. All right. So, but my goal is to crease that line here because that's the center line. And when I get a crease in the center of this line, then I have the center line where I can create my curve, right? So basically what I do is I click on the edge, click spacebar, and then I go under crease. And on the top menu, you see all the different operations. And when you click crease on the bottom menu, you see the settings for these operations. You can see here now. I want to crease every single edge, or I want to crease a complete edge loop or edge loop complete. Of course, this is what I want to do. And the foundation, it's of course important, is you need a full edge loop, fully supported, that goes all around the mesh, otherwise it wouldn't work. So now I'm clicking it, and as you can see, you get now those double lines, and that's the indication that we have been creating successfully a crease, and that goes all the way around. So this is just one line. So now, since we know now how our brush stroke is working in our curve operations, you can see here we have now the curve, and then we have the curve functions, and we know now we can use the creased edges that I used before to frame the mesh, to basically create us a curve, or the spline, so to speak. So we set this up now, we click creased edges, select that, and click frame mesh, and now you see we got all these points, and we got a wonderful curve that we created before. And this curve is also centered and aligned to this front face here. This is the centerpiece where we really would like to have our pearls, right? Now, since we used our IMM stone brush before, we load it again. Then make sure under the curve functions or features, you still have the curve step at 0.9 because, you know, that's unfortunately if it wasn't set up correctly from the base. And then we hover over our curve. We also want to make sure we have the draw size set up. So you can click S while you hover over, make 16. And now if we click on it, you can see it creates it. And here, this is the funky part. Sometimes you see some breakups in between, but it really depends on where you click. And then, yeah, now it looks great. It really almost worked out 100%, but as I said before, got a better result when I was pushing the spline a little bit higher up like this. And the reason why is because I want to have those pearls really aligned on this edge of the head, because for baking purpose. And these lines are really important. You want to be very, very accurate. You want to work on this very accurate, because that's basically the beginning of the line. This is also the front facing, and that's the first line of the stones you're setting. Because if you want to set more stones all over, you want to have the right start. Otherwise, if you don't consider that, you will go crazy later on. So again, on the subtool, now we have it really nicely set up. I can say split the masked points or the unmasked points, whatever you prefer. And now if we have this, also if you see the curve, I always go then here under my curve functions and delete the curve because I don't want to see it anymore. And now we can say, you know what, this is a really, really nice looking, perfect aligned curve we have on this head. So I save my tool again, and we have now two subtools with those curves. But that was basically the beginning. But I also want to mention what is now important for baking from low resolution to high resolution. First of all, as you can see, we don't have still a lot of active points, but of course, if the whole head should have gemstones on it or little pearls on a string, you get a lot of polygons over and over, right? So the goal for baking is also that we want to make sure that the base mesh has a good, solid, flat surface we can project things on it. And as you can see right now, this is the low poly mesh from the head, and we have then also the gemstones on it, just one row, but I want to show one test and push this all through Substance to give you a better picture how to set this up and how to bake it also. So let's get started. When I go into the subtool at this point here, okay, you can still see in the visible counts, I make this a little bit larger here, that we have here our head, which is the low poly head, and then we created this new pearl string, and then we had here another one, but I just do this one here now. I think that is the best for demonstration to see like how accurate you have to work and what you have to consider. And what is also important is that definitely we want to export the low poly head first. And then we want to create a high resolution because we want to have everything smooth and super nicely fitting, So how we do this is this. So first of all, on the C plugin, we want to make sure that the low poly head also has the UVs. So if we don't have any UVs, we unwrap it real quick. I can go then here and also flatten it and see like, okay, it's not perfect, but just for quick presentation, we have it nicely unwrapped, and then I unflatten it again. And this is it for our low poly. And then we go and we say like, okay, we want to export the selected head only with the low polygon smooth normals turned on. So we export this, and I call this head 09 low. Okay. So this is saved. We're saving it out currently, and it's only the head. We don't want to have any more. Now, if we want to get really smooth results, we subdivide this a couple times until we don't see this faceted anymore. And I think this is smooth enough. Yeah, I think this is smooth enough. And now what we can do is we can say, you know what? Now let's export everything. We want to export the head and the pearls on the string as one high resolution mesh. So what we do now is we go into C plugin, and now instead of selected, we want to choose all visible, including the normals, and export it. And we call this now head number 9 high, because we want to use this mesh as the high resolution mesh to bake it on top of the low resolution. Now we have also a perfect match in terms of the size. And now let's get started. So I had here done a test before, but I start completely from scratch. I usually start the document resolution by 496, depending on what game engine you use later on. If you use normal map, viewing through DirectX, or OpenGL, that's up to you or the game engine, but you can also in the export settings then select it for what specific engine you would like to export it, and so we're also correcting the green. I think the green channel is flipped between DirectX and OpenGL. So, but anyways, you could also select here templates, okay, but I don't actually choose any templates. I just go, well, like with no template at all. So, but now it's time to select the head 009 low polygon. This is the beginning, what we have been exporting from Zbrush. So once this is selected, you click OK. We don't want to save here anything. And then you can see we have here the low polygon head. And then we can go into bake. And I just make a quick bake just on all the standard settings here and just see if my low polygon mesh with the UVs, you see the UVs, they are not really good unwrapped UVs because you want to maximize the texture map size, for maximum textile density. And this was just a quick and dirty auto unwrap, but it serves the purpose for now to basically show what we are doing. So, and as you can see, the bake worked out on the low res. That means we have no unwrapping issues, UV issues, and everything looks clean. But now, of course, we want to bake the high resolution mesh on top of it. So there are a few things, and I want to show you. First of all, I change the output size to 4K, and then here you load, when you click on this little icon here, you basically load then the high resolution mesh into the bake, okay? And what we saved out was head 009 high. You need to give it a little bit time of loading. And then I just bake with the standard frontal distance and max rear distance options, and also with no anti-aliasing at the beginning, just to see if I'm getting actually from the cage that is considered for the baking, if I'm getting any distortions or any issues or anything like this, okay? So now the bake runs through and it creates literally like thickness, curvature, position, AO, ID, world space, and normal maps. So when we look into this, we can actually check immediately and see if our bake is good. And what we see is it looks like everything is in place, right? Everything is okay. The only thing that is a little disturbing immediately is you can see how edgy the bake is, right? When you zoom in. And then this can be fixed with anti-aliasing, and you could even then go higher resolution, but usually that's an anti-aliasing issue. So you can go back in and then change the anti-aliasing to 8x8. You could also try the other ones, but let's do 8x8 and let's run another test. It will take longer, that's clear, but you can already see while the bake for the normal map was done that those edges who have been very shaggy and edgy are getting resolved now with the AA, with the higher anti-aliasing settings. It takes just longer, but definitely it looks much, much better. So, and then we have another issue I want to show you. So you see here now, this looks so much cleaner, and we have been zooming in like hardcore, right? So this is what you want to get. And if you don't get a clean result like this, that means somewhere you made a mistake. But this should be your goal. This is what you are aiming for and shooting for, because you want to make sure that you get a clean bake, right? Now, I point out immediately another issue, because when you're here, you can now assign a material. Let's say I assign here the brass golden material here, right? Now you can clearly see that I would like to select now the beads with the different material, but heck, how can I do this? Because I don't have a mask. And yeah, you could create bitmap masks, but that's kind of like really difficult. I mean, not difficult, but it's a lot of work, because you need to consider then the unwrapping is already completely done. And once the unwrapping is done, then you can create all those texture maps. And with the texture maps, you can load different map IDs or masks and bring that in. I prefer actually vertex color. So that means I can paint or fill a color in Zbrush on top of any of my subtools or layers, if you will, and then make a color selection by the vertex color, or and mask it out by the vertex color. So I show you. So we have to go back into Zbrush, and then here in Zbrush, what I have to do is I have to make sure that I select now my beads, so basically this one. And what you see here is also in the subtools, there's a little brush, and that means it shows you also then the vertex color that is painted on. Vertex color is nothing else like painting color on the geometry, if you will. Now by default everything is white, and basically all the geometry has a white fill color on it. Let's say we color our pearls with the string on it red. So what I have to do is I have to select it, select here red color, and then go under color and click fill object. Now what you see is that everything is red, and when I change now my color back to white here, it's still red. And the reason why it's red is because the fill color filled it all up. So all those beads with the strings are now red. Now, as you can see here, I can turn off in my viewport the painted color with this little icon here. It's maybe hard to see, but this little icon right next to the eye icon is a paint brush or brush icon. And that basically allows you to turn off the color. So when you colorized it, you can turn it off. And here I can turn on my head, and now you see the color, of course, right? So and if it's bothering me, I can turn off the color if I don't want to see it, while I'm working. But for now, I leave it on. And now what you need to do in order to pick the color, you need to export the high resolution again with the color information. Now we put color information on it. I can also save my tool for later on. And what we have to do now is we have to export the high resolution mesh again with the color information. So we see everything that is basically visible we want to select. We click export and we say head 009 and say yes. Okay. So the export always takes a little bit depending on your machine, on the computer, on your hard drive, and also how dense everything is. And now if I go back to Substance Painter, I need to rebake this whole thing with the new geometry here. Okay. It's the same geometry because I was writing over. Oops, and I forgot something very, very important. And this is super important. So when you rebake, you need to also tell the bake, hey, I want to do color selections or vertex color information, that we have been baking in. I want to use it and select it. I don't want to just use material color. So you have to go into the IDs, and this is maybe IDs, from Photoshop or maybe from the Cryptomat. And then in here, you change this to vertex color because we put now the color information into the vertex color information. And now you click bake selected textures. So now it goes through the 4K bake. We also did the 8x8 anti-aliasing that we get really clean and crisp results for the color selection. And then we'll see if this whole thing actually went through and if it also works. And I show it on a simple example by applying 2 different materials to the head, because that's all what we need. So first of all, in this case, I delete my gold and I go into a fabric. I had here already like a pink fabric. I change here the tiling, leave it like this, and then put in like under my technical parameters, maybe the normal intensity to 1, that the fabric really pops out. And then you see already that if I start with the first material here, the fabric has also a normal map on it, and it would also influence basically the pearls, because the normal map underneath of this ground or foundation layer would influence everything, but we don't want that. So this is where I click on my layer already, and then you see here I can now create different masks. I can add a white mask, a black mask, a bitmap mask, or a color selection, a mask with color selection. And this is what we want, so I click it. And this is the vertex color I was preparing now. And if you see here below, we have now pick a color. And if you do that, you can see I can choose now between the colors. When I click on pick color, I get my little pipette here or whatever, my color picker. And now I can choose, hey, I want to have my purple fabric only on the white head, on the white material. So I click it. And now you can see that the pearls are already excluded, which is cool, right? Because I don't get this normal information onto my pearls and the strings. You also see here. Now another cool option in the color selection is basically I have a tolerance, and you can see that this tolerance is very, very important also for the radius, right? Because how strong do you want to get into basically the tolerance of this curve of the blending. And then maybe what we don't see really here is the hardness. This is better to see than actually later for the gold, and I'll show you. So now we have the first step done, and now let's say, I don't know what we want to put on the beads, but or the pearls, we could just say like aluminum, put it on top of it. And now we have to consider the same procedure, but in this particular case, again, right mouse click on the layer, add a mask with color selection. We pick now the other color. We pick now red. And what you also can see is that especially with metal, you can also see here still those hard edges. And what we can do is we can change the hardness and the tolerance. See that? And then it really fades super nice into that. I mean, this is a hardcore zoom in, right? And then of course in the aluminum, you could also change then, like maybe you don't want to have it so hard falling off in pitch black in the metalness, and change the roughness a little bit. You know, that's really up to you. You can make them really sharp in the reflection, but you can also make them a little bit more blurry. And then this is really up to you. But this is kind of like a clean and nice workflow. Yeah, how you do this whole procedure. And I think I can't stress enough how important it actually is to work accurate from the beginning using Zbrush, but also the low poly meshes, what you create for all the IMM brushes and so on, so that you can later on project really nicely and clean without any distortion, and you get the best results. And you know, unless this isn't a high resolution product shot and you use this for games, and in particular really for games where you have to bake, then this is definitely, I think, like a clean way to do it. And I think the only way how you can achieve this in a very nice professional way. So I think I showed and documented everything. Now, once you have a basic setup with all your IMM brushes, with all the tools, with the gemstones, whatever you like, then it's really fun going in and creating all the details of the head. And then you might also be able to mix, of course, like real 3D gemstones in and keep them because they're more low poly, or you want to still bake them on top of it. That's really up to you. But I think that's a good presentation and shows also like the workflow, how it should be done and how you can achieve it. Of course, now here you can clearly see how simple that is if you want to just exchange the base mesh, right, with anything else. I don't know, let's say you want to have, instead of this mesh, you want to have this mesh here, you know, and then create all kinds of, you know, different, fabrics, different colors. Can go in and change this head to like green or whatever, but you can see this works really nicely now. Okay, so I think my process was documented and helps not just myself in future, but everybody else in future as well, to use Zbrush. We went over like a little bit subtools, but mainly about how to create an IMM brush, how to set it up, how to use then the stroke features to use curves, which curves for me are also like kind of like splines in a procedural way. And then also how we change the brush settings with the depth, which was a little bit funky and wonky here, I have to say, but also with the modifiers we can use here, welding points, and so on. So I hope it explains everything and I covered everything, and yeah, happy ZBrushing. Bye bye.